We'll start the recording now, and thank you all for coming. Sharon, it's good to see you. Alex, thanks for joining us. This is Friday Art Lunch Bunch. I'm Frank Korb. To welcome our weekly artist this week is Frank Juarez, little bro Frank Juarez. Frank is a painter and educator up in the Sheboygan neighborhood. Is that right, Sheboygan?
Sheboygan.
Sheboygan. Woo. So we'll get things going there. And thanks for joining us, Frank. How is things up in Sheboygan?
Great. Thanks for having me, big bro Frank.
Frank's interview is inspired by an interview that he and I had together. Gosh, I mean, it's probably a month and a half ago now. And
yeah.
So I appreciate him through his Art Dose magazine pulling together interviews of artists throughout. So if you're watching this later on, take a look at, what's your website, Frank?
It's Art Dose, ARTDOSE magazine.com.
Great stuff. A lot of wonderful interviews by contemporary artists because the historical artists are very hard to interview nowadays. Frank is an award-winning art educator, artist, author, presenter, arts advocate, and former gallery director living and working in Sheboygan, Wisconsin. Frank brings 19 years of art education and arts management experience, organizing local and regional art exhibitions, community art events, facilitating presentations, supporting artists through grant programs, and professional development workshops. This has placed him in the forefront of promoting Wisconsin artists, networking and attracting regional, national, and international artists to collaborate and exhibit in Wisconsin. And really some wonderful publications. I've really enjoyed following what you've been doing and sharing that with my students, and then, you know, becoming a friend of many of the artists that you've worked with, and that's just been great. Frank's statement is, "My paintings are driven by a collection of certain things that can influence my work. In my studio, I reduce those visuals into paintings with a minimalistic approach. Throughout my practice, I bring what is important to the surface so the viewer can connect and interpret meaning." Juarez has exhibited at venues including the Museum of Wisconsin Art, Thelma Sadoff Center for the Arts at Carroll University, Cedarburg Cultural Center, Brickton Art Center, John Michael Kohler Art Center, the Anderson Art Center, Rar West Art Museum, and Var West Gallery. Juarez is currently the art department chair at Sheboygan North High School. This is the cover of this particular month's Art Dose magazine. It's a great read. You can get at those. And let me just pin you, Frank, real quick here. Pin video, there we go. And it's great because what I like about this is it not only tells about all the artists that are in the area, but it also has really great interviews with some of those artists and then promotes shows and galleries. How long have you been at this venture?
So I started that in 2013. The idea was inspired by a trip that I did to Richmond, Virginia, with a really good friend of mine, Randy. And one of the things, he's a doctor of chemistry, and I'm an art teacher. And so one of the things that we have in common is we like to visit galleries and museums and studios. And so we happened to walk into like a boutique or gallery. I can't really remember what it was, but I remember picking up this art guide, and as a visitor, it gave me a sense of where to go. You know, even though the internet is such a great tool, it's hard to archive things. You know, with information constantly being shared. So I picked this up and use it as a guide. And one of the things that I often do is I often reflect on my own practice, my students, my own community. And so I had this idea of like, why not create something like this in Sheboygan? And at first, you know, and I'm sure you know people like this, and I've done this myself, but you know, it's like you see something that's a really good idea, but you don't want to put the time and effort into it. And you say, hey, why don't you do this?
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I did with the local coffee shop. And it just sat, and then finally I decided, you know, if I'm really thinking about this, and I think it's a good idea, that I'm just gonna run with it. So that's kind of how the Artos, at the time it was Artos art guide, and it was focused on just in Sheboygan.
Mm-hmm.
And then slowly from there, it started to branch out to like Sheboygan County, and then Northeast and Southeast Wisconsin. And the main reason why I really like this publication is because it's a way to build bridges among communities. You know, whether you're in Manitowoc or Burlington or Egg Harbor, it's such a great resource because the idea is to encompass all visual arts in Wisconsin.
Yeah.
So that's been the journey so far. It's gone through a few revisions. The magazine is funded by advertisers, and there was a point in its history where we weren't getting enough advertisers, and the last thing you want to do is to fund out of pocket, right? Especially as teachers, we don't have that disposable income to do that. And then so
or as artists, for that matter.
Exactly. And so we revised the publication from like a 20-page to down to like a French fold 8-pager. And they kind of got to the point where, once again, the advertisers weren't there anymore, decreasing. And so I remember meeting one of my contributing writers, Erica Block, who's been with the magazine since the beginning. And she has experience as a publisher and editor. And so I had asked, you know, what does it take to become a magazine? Because I have like no experience in this at all. My education experience is in education.
Yeah.
And she's like, you need content. So I'm like, all right, you know. So then I started to reach some friends that I've known for the past few years, and it kind of grew from there. So what's nice about the magazine, it's not solely just an art guide, but it's also an advocacy resource. And that's one of the things that I instill in what I do as an educator and as an art professional, is that we need more people to support and advocate for the visual arts. And so that magazine kind of satisfies that need.
That's great. And you can also get cool t-shirts with your logo on it. So, but
Yep.
That's another day. So when you find these out and about, make sure you pick one up and help support. These are great. All right, now on to your artwork. I'll let you just start talking. And, you know, I've opened this up to anybody. If anybody in the audience would like to ask a question, just unmute yourself and ask. And there we go. So thank you. Go ahead, Frank.
All right. So I'm going to give you a bit of a timeline to put things in perspective. So I've been painting since 2000. And it wasn't until about 2008 that I started to find my voice as an artist. And from 2008 to 2010 is when I was heavily invested in my studio practice. I mean, I was making work. I got my second win at 10 o'clock at night, and I would stay up to 2 a.m. knowing that I could teach the next day. And I did that for about 3 days straight. But then after that, my interest shifted more into the gallery side, which is what I've been doing since 2006. And so the last time that I painted in my studio, which at the time it was in my basement, was 2016. From there, I rarely lifted a brush. every time I would smell oil paints, I'll get the urge to paint, but then the motivation kind of fizzled, knowing that life takes over with its obligations and priorities.
Hmm.
Um, and so I haven't really like actively painted since almost 4 years ago. Um, and to me, it was interesting because someone had asked that question, like, how often do you paint? And I told them that I haven't painted since 2016, and they're like, I feel really sorry for you. And I didn't quite understand what she meant by that. Um, I do miss the act of painting. I'm an abstract painter, but if you think of painting, it's about creating, and I'm constantly creating, whether it's doing exhibitions or personal projects like the magazine. So I'm always creating. It's just that I'm creating with a different material.
Absolutely. So
Um,
that's where your advocacy really comes into play. When I think of you, I think of gallerist. I do know your abstract work, so I think of you as an abstract painter. But gallerist and advocate and educator are like three of the things that really leap forward for me when I think of Frank Juarez.
Thanks. And I really like that combination because it really it helps me understand the needs of artists and students, and that's my target audience is how can I help artists become successful. I don't have a secret formula, but what I can do is share what I found to be successful. And so about I think last year, I was Josh Hintz is the owner of our West and our gallery in Walker's Point, and he curated an exhibition of people that have contributed to the Milwaukee art scene. So he invited artists, gallerists, and some other people, and he had invited me, and I was a little embarrassed because, like I said, I didn't have anything painted since 2016. So I contributed a painting, and that was part of the show, and I was very thankful. And one of the things that I really missed is exhibiting with my peers.
Mm-hmm.
And I often think that sometimes when people view gallerists, you think of the hierarchy, right? You think of a gallerist up here and then an artist on here.
Yeah.
And the way I operate is we're more like this, side by side. And so I was very thankful to have that opportunity. And a lot of the people that were there were people that I knew personally. So it was really cool. And then from there, I realized that I wanted to go back to the studio. And so shortly after that, I did a residency in Kansas City at the Art Institute. And it was a residency for secondary art educators to be back in the studio and make art. And it was really cool. I had a really good time. It was about a week. But then once I got back into Wisconsin, that stopped. Life took over. And so I haven't really painted since then. But the interesting thing about being, self-quarantine right now is right now we have the gift of time. And that's something that we don't often um, think about, because we're always hustling with work or leisure activities or whatever.
Yeah.
And so teaching online and being home, pretty much Monday through Sunday, I reorganized my studio, which had become a storage room. And so it's functional space. And so I find myself down here for hours, and I'm starting to make more art. So what you see right now on the screen is my latest piece. I'm not 100% sure if that's what I like.
Uh-huh.
And so this is a piece that I created. And I was motivated by the current show that I have online called the Art of Collage too.
Mm-hmm.
And then last week we did a kind of May 9th was the World Collage Day, which is established by Collage Magazine based out of Canada. And so we decided to do kind of a virtual online show and tell, kind of just talk about materials and processes. And so that conversation motivated me to start making some of my own work. And so this is a kind of a mixed media collage. At the bottom is actually a photograph of Lake Michigan. So one of the things that I have discovered is I find myself walking more outside, which says a lot because I'm not an active person in terms of leisurely walking. And so I usually walk with my camera or my cell phone, and I take a lot of pictures. I live about maybe a mile and a half, 2 miles away from Lake Michigan, and so I took a picture of this particular water, and then I like to recycle old paintings. So at the top you see an old painting that I did, and then those two little triangles are just pieces of magazines that I collect. So kind of a combination. Not sure what it means. I don't have a title. Right now, it's still brewing. I'm not quite sure if that's exactly what composition I'm going for, but I like it.
Great. There was an interview, and I can't remember who it was with, but it was film was about Robert Rauschenberg, and one of his minimalist friends was in there, and the conversation was kind of like, well, what does this mean? He comes out of Rauschenberg's studio, and Rauschenberg says something back to him like, well, I've seen your studio too, and I know you don't always know what it means at that point. Mm-hmm. So it'll come later.
Oh, yeah.
So these are smaller pieces. I'm going to gather 8 by 10 maybe?
No, these are actually, I want to say 3 by 5 inches, 3 by 6 inches.
They're tiny.
They are tiny. I have a picture right here actually.
Sure.
So they're kind of small.
Oh, that's small.
Great. And this one I really, really love, maybe because it's a little more abstract. And once again, you see some familiarity. You see the photograph of the water. But I'm just, compiling different things to make it, kind of unique. But what's interesting about collaging is people only see what they're introduced to. So all you see is what's in the window.
Right.
I actually cropped it. So what I want to do is show you what the actual piece looks like. So you get a sneak peek. And one of the things that I stress to my students is always look for an exciting composition. Mm-hmm. So this is what it looks like in its entirety.
Oh, Frank.
So this one is an entirety. And so what I do is I'll grab this mat as a viewfinder, and I'll kind of navigate the composition till I feel something that excites me.
Oh, that's great.
So that's kind of what that one is. No title.
Nothing.
Not yet. So this is, I would say these are my most recent paintings. And by recent, I mean June of this past summer.
Oh, that's
so almost a year ago. These are actually done with acrylic on paper mounted on wood cradle panel. But as far as the application of paint, what I use is, I don't use a brush. I use a writing nib. So let me show you what that looks like.
Interesting.
They're right over here.
As he steps away, I find myself using my brushes fewer and fewer in my underpaintings, using a lot of palette knives and paint scrapers and corner protectors and big gigantic devices. Oh, okay. So calligraphy style tools.
So this is what it looks like. Can you see it?
Yep.
I started using these for pen and ink drawings. and they're used for calligraphy. And so one of the things that I find myself doing when I do make any art is I tend to use non-traditional tools. And my practice has shifted into more experimental. So I'm always trying different things and see how they communicate, on paper or
Right.
canvas. This one is called Soundwave.
Oh.
Same, same application. Excuse me. Just using the writing nibs, and just playing, and just trying to use a limited palette of what I think works best. And so all those vertical lines were done with the tool.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I've always done with my paintings is I always kind of give a sneak peek of something that's underneath. So if you look at towards the bottom, there's this little blue strip, as a way to kind of give a person some breathing room. Just like when you see an abstract painting, color is great, but you also want to give some spots where they can just take a break.
Right.
So
is that an underpainting then? You painted the whole piece this under blue, and then
yep.
did some grattage. So scrape. You paint the wet area and then scrape it out.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
So on the panel it's blue, but the purple and yellow, that's actually was painted on on paper.
Okay.
And the actual size was about 16 by 20, so I actually cut it down. So once again, kind of the same process by using this.
Yeah.
A 16 by 20 painting may look good, but it may not look great until you crop it. So, so I'm always kind of figuring out what I think looks good.
I do enjoy in this piece how it falls off the edges. Did it fall off the edge in the original?
No.
No. Okay. Good compositional choice.
This one is called Nets, and kind of the same process. There's multiple layers. And this one just reminded me of like a night scene, where actually is the lights on. And once again, just every negative space, if you will, with the yellow and pink, they're all different. And so I really like how they're all different. And I just like some of the texture that has been left from the paper that kind of adds to it. But this one's 8 by 10 inches, and the other two are 10 by 8 inches.
Okay, height by width, always.
Yeah. So they're fairly paper size.
Oh, that's great. This is a little different.
Yeah, this was I think this was a few years ago. Once again, Lake Michigan. I've been living in Sheboygan since 2004, and I was never someone that appreciated the water coming from the Milwaukee. I was more of a city guy. But over the years, I've learned to appreciate it. I've used it as a way to calm down. It's very tranquil, and so I found myself photographing water, and then and it's just kind of like a lot of things are embedded. But when I was in grade school, I had perfect penmanship, very perfect cursive. And I used to I went to Oliver Window Homes on the north side of Milwaukee, and I was bused, and I lived on the south side.
Okay.
And I remember being on the bus. This is probably like 3rd or 4th grade, and this kid leaned over my bus seat, and I was writing in my notebook or sketchbook, and he's like, "You write like a girl."
Oh no.
And then from there, as I was progressing through my education, my handwriting got sloppier and sloppier and sloppier, to the point where I was, a senior, and I couldn't read my own handwriting. It's just chicken scratch.
Oh my goodness.
And now that I'm older, I don't care what people think about me or care how I write. So I kind of use it as a way to kind of go back into relearning penmanship. And so so I started. So these are actually gouache on inkjet prints of bodies of water that I photographed. And so what I do is I create a stencil. I'll transfer it to the photograph, but then I have to hold it from a light to see where the light is, or where the impression is. And then what I'll do is I'll use gouache and I'll paint it with a fine brush.
Yeah.
And if you mess up, then you got to start over. So there's that little risk factor, but I really enjoyed it. And I think it just adds another layer to the painting. This one's called Sunset Dreams. If you notice towards the bottom, there's a little figure. That's actually a surfer. Sheboygan is known as the Malibu of the Midwest. And surfing on Lake Michigan is highly popular with a lot of surfers and enthusiasts. And so at the time, it was a sunset, and to me, water is a good way to daydream. So I just seemed kind of appropriate to write that in there. So,
did you have any plans for these as you were making the photograph, or was that something that came to you later?
Later, they're all intuitive.
Okay.
They're all intuitive. I never do plan anything that I do artistically.
Okay.
I just go with the flow, and I let my experience kind of navigate me and my sense of aesthetics, and also meaning too.
Yeah.
But I try to make something that people can relate to somehow.
Oh, that's great.
These are about 7-year-old paintings. I don't quite remember what this one's called, but this is oil on canvas. And one of the things that I've found myself doing is I tend to use an X-Acto knife on my canvases as a way to make marks. And so what you see around the two organic shapes is actually me scraping kind of a border around them, but then also connecting them. If you look at the orange, there's a bunch of lines that actually connects to the other side. So I've been using that quite a bit, obviously carefully because I don't want to cut through the canvas, but just using non-traditional tools just to make different marks that you normally wouldn't create if you used a brush or a palette knife.
That's great. Do you find your students are braver to use non-traditional tools because you, as their exemplar, does the same? Or are they safe?
No, that's an interesting question. Most of our curriculum at North is traditional in terms of materials.
Yeah.
There was a project that I did called Push, Pull, and Play, and that was based off of a lesson I created based on paintings by Joe Bussell from Kansas. And he uses non-traditional tools like cardboard, squeegees, wood, and he does really large abstract pieces on paper. And so I did a unit where I actually had my students, read about Joe. There was actually a video that I did. This is through a project that I created called the Midwest Artist Studios project. Yeah. And when I presented the project to the kids, I'm like, you can create anything. You can use any tool, any material to create your large, self-expressive paintings. And it took them a while to get started because it was like a curveball.
Right.
And they did 3 large, like probably 4 by 5 feet paintings. And for them, the first one was kind of awkward because they had no idea what they wanted to do or how to even approach it. But kids, they learn very quick. And so by the second painting, they were comfortable and a little more expressive. One student said, "Can I use my feet?" I'm like, "Yeah, you can use your feet." One student said, "Can I use marbles?" "Yeah, you can use marbles." "Can I use sponges?" "Of course." So I
Yeah.
didn't want to set any parameters as far as how they could create these paintings. But the nice thing about contemporary art is there's a lot of non-traditional approaches to making art, and so I'm starting to use those more with my students. But it's more based on their readiness,
Right.
before I let them do what they have to do. So.
Oh, that's fantastic. 4 by 5 feet is a big painting for a high school kid.
Oh yeah, they were pretty cool.
What did they do them on? Paper or canvas?
Paper,
Paper,
paper.
okay.
Yep.
That's a little more affordable.
Yeah, and this is paper that was donated. So
That's nice.
this one is, I think it's called "Pull Me Away." Once again, the little lines in the middle is X-Acto knife. I use a ruler, and so in my artist statement, I mentioned about approaching my work with a minimalistic approach,
Yeah.
and abstraction is it's kind of it's a hard genre for people to understand because they don't quite know what it means. Um, but I remember when I was in 2008, I met Thomas Noskowski, who had passed away uh, a few months ago. But he's a professor in New York, a painter, and I was participating in a program called TICA, which stands for the Teacher Institute of Contemporary Art. And I remember talking to him, and he gave me some really good feedback. But it wasn't until I saw a video of him talking about his work and what his process is. And I remember him sitting in the studio, and he told the videographer, you see a little red dot that's recording on your camcorder? I can make a painting based off of that. And so oftentimes when I paint, I think about that. And as an artist, we kind of dissect something to determine what's the meaning of this painting.
Yeah.
And being abstraction, what I say, people might not necessarily see.
Yeah.
But I think there's probably things that people can kind of relate to, to the color, to the lines, or, whatever. But anyways, that's kind of how I approach my paintings.
One of the things I still notice, and I don't know the time frame between this piece and one of the first pieces where you've got that little blue line at the bottom, but on the left-hand side of this one, there's that little blue and that little
Yeah.
golden. That's the
Yeah.
underpainting. That's the peeking into.
Yeah. So this one is 2013. One of the first paintings that's 2019.
Oh wow! So there's a common thread that even with 6
Yeah.
years,
Yeah.
that's wonderful. Oh boy.
So these are some studio shots, works in progress. This was kind of same approach. I used an X-Acto knife, but I also started to use like spray paint.
Mm-hmm.
And this spray paint is what construction workers use on sidewalks. And just kind of experimenting in how it's interesting when materials react to one another, and so when I make these paintings, my intention is never to sell them. Like I'm not gonna say I'm gonna go to my studio and I'm gonna make 5 paintings that I'm gonna sell. That's
Right.
never my intent. Although I do sell eventually, but when I make them, I try to take that part of the equation out of the mix. And so this is 8 by 10, just kind of experimental, and just kind of see how things kind of go from there.
That's great.
Mm-hmm.
And this next one is a closer detail.
Closer detail. Yep.
And here's your workspace.
Yeah. So these are the first 2 collages that you showed in the beginning. So it just talks about a little bit about my process. As you can see, they're completely different. And so just using the map to kind of navigate the space and find out a composition that resonates with me.
Oh, these are great.
Mm-hmm. And then these are a couple more shots, so you kind of see the end product. It's just fun.
It is. It's interesting to know that there's something else happening underneath the mat. And as a viewer of those pieces, knowing that now, it would be, I mean, for me, it would drive me crazy because I would want to see what's under there. I'm that person at the museum who's told to step away from the wall. You're too close to the artwork.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would love to see what's behind all of those pieces. There's a particular piece at the St. Kate Hotel in Milwaukee, and I forget the photographer's name. I think it's a pair. I don't know if they're a husband-wife or if they're friends, but they pose these photographs that are kind of historically based. And in this one particular, there's a circle cut from the middle of the piece, and I feel like it's where the head would be. And the curator on a tour said that if you shine a light on it and hold it away from the wall, it does a crescent moon. But you can't do that with that particular piece because it's mounted to the wall. And so it'd be, you know, why don't you take it off the wall and show us? And she was like, no, we're not going to do that. But to see the inner workings and the inner thoughts of pieces like these collages, it's so wonderful to hear. So if anybody's got any questions or comments or thoughts, please feel free to ask. I think this is the end of, the end of our slideshow. Please visit Frank's website at frankjuarezpaintings.com. And you had mentioned Art Dose Magazine, which is once again?
artdosemagazine.com.
Very cool. Well, thanks, Frank, for joining us and for sharing your incredible works with us. And until we see each other again, little bro.
My pleasure, big bro.
Take care. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Stay safe out there. Put your masks on. Don't touch your face. Bye, Scotty. Good to see you. Bye, Alexa. Thanks for coming.